All right, I think we'll get started here. Thank you everyone so much for joining. For accessibility purposes throughout the presentation, we'll ask each presenter to self-describe themselves when they're first on screen. My name is Katie Daniel. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. For my audio self-description, I'm a female identifying person with long brown hair, a white shirt, and a blue jacket. I'm the Director of Development at Reading in Motion. I joined the team just 2 short weeks before we all went remote and everything changed. I've been so inspired by our response as we continue to impact students and teachers in spite of the educational challenges. I look forward to the discussion ahead and the impact we can create together. I'm now proud to welcome you to the first in our new event series, Reading Together Now. Twice a year, we'll bring together community members, field experts, and our staff for conversations centered on the topics of early learning, literacy education, and what we can do to strengthen our communities now and later. As we know, in response to COVID-19, there is a widespread shift to virtual learning. Tonight, we'll discuss the challenges facing early literacy education right now and the impact on families. Let's explore together how the new normal affects early learning. But first, a few housekeeping points. In our reminder email today, we included a digital land acknowledgement. I invite everyone to return to that acknowledgement after our event and reflect on our privileges in the context of the topics we will discuss today. The event will consist of an introduction from Carl Andros, Reading in Motion co-founder and executive director. Then we'll launch into our panel discussion, and a Q&A will follow after the discussion. In conclusion, Reading in Motion board chair, Jill Fragus, will close our event and invite you to remain engaged with our organization. If you'd like to adjust the sidebar at any point throughout the presentation to make panelists larger or smaller, hover your pointer over the boundary between the shared screen and participants' video until your pointer changes to a double arrow and you see a gray line separating both views. And you can click and drag the separator to adjust the size of the view. To add closed captioning, in the toolbar, if you hover near the bottom of your Zoom screen, select the CC or live transcript button to see closed captioning of our event in real time. There will be a recording of this webinar available within a week following the event, so watch your emails for that recording. And as a note, we will be focusing on the current educational landscape rather than the medical nuances and health implications related to the pandemic. And we appreciate if you keep any questions centered in the education arena. Finally, we ask that you put questions into the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar found at the bottom of the screen and not in the chat. Now, for a little background on Reading in Motion, I'm excited to turn it over to our co-founder and executive director, Carl Andros. Carl?
Thank you, Katie. Hello, I'm Carl Andros, founder and executive director of RIM. I am a Caucasian male, salt and pepper hair, and a beard and mustache. Like most areas of our lives these days, education is currently facing unprecedented challenges. Nearly every school in the whole United States is 100% virtual right now. Some predict schools will stay that way the entire school year, and if not longer, or until there is a vaccine and everyone has been given it. Reading in Motion is no stranger to challenges, from national economic meltdowns to education disruptions of all kinds. We've been here 37 years after all, so we've seen a few. We also know challenges in that time can lead to innovation and growth. So there is a silver lining, possibly, but that doesn't make every moment of challenges any fun. And the challenges today are once in a lifetime kinds of challenges. Certainly in my experience, it's nothing like I've seen before. I co-founded Reading in Motion in 1983 with a main focus on teaching music and drama in schools. We soon saw in schools that they needed us to pivot our focus from arts skills to improving reading skills in our students. We currently serve pre-K through first graders with our music and drama infused reading curriculum. Tonight's topic is of great interest to me and to all of us at Reading in Motion. In the past 6 months, our team has converted all of our program content to virtual. We are calling our new work Reading Together Anywhere. It leverages our demonstrably effective and arts-integrated curriculum, which has been successful in thousands of physical classrooms, and it adapts it using cutting-edge technology tools. There is still lots of singing and acting and students doing physical things in our new virtual work. They're just doing it in their living rooms, not in physical classrooms. We are so grateful for the support of you, our community, which enables us to remain a responsive partner to teachers and students. We're excited to host this first in a series of virtual events, which we're calling Strange New Words, Early Literacy in a Virtual World, which we hope will keep you informed, spur collaboration, discussion, and innovation, and provide practical solutions as we all work together to support our youngest and most vulnerable learners. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll hand you off now to our discussion moderator, Reading in Motion's Director of Education, Kristen Walter.
Thank you, Carl. My name is Kristen Walter. I identify as female. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I've been with Reading in Motion for 2 years after about 15 years in the classroom and several years with an arts organization. So it's a delight to be here. I would like to have our panelists introduce themselves before we start with our questions. And they're going to go in the order that you see at the bottom of your screen. So Samina, we're going to start with you. And I know that she was having a little bit of trouble with her camera. So actually, Matt, let's start with you and we'll circle back and have Samina introduce herself.
No worries. How am I coming across?
Beautiful, clear.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Jacobson. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. I am a bald Caucasian male. I wear glasses, and I am currently wearing a blue button-down shirt displaying the logo of the Learning Technology Center of Illinois. As the online learning specialist for the LTC, I provide K-12 educators and technology staff with synchronous and asynchronous online and in-person training activities, including workshops, online courses, micro-credentials, and webinars, among several other things that I do. Prior to this, I taught middle school social studies and science for 12 years. I used to have hair. I was also a consultant for a few years and a technology coordinator for 12 years. I am currently coming to you from beautiful rural Western Illinois.
Fantastic. Emily, do you mind introducing yourself next?
Hello, my name is Emily Quinlan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white female with shoulder length, brown curly hair, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a big necklace. I am a first grade teacher in Chicago Public Schools. This is my 9th year teaching and my 9th year teaching first grade and my first year teaching online. And this is my 2nd year working with Reading in Motion.
Great, and then Cheyenne, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, my name is Cheyan Stander. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white Hispanic female with brown hair that sits just below my shoulders. I am wearing a tan shirt. I am a teacher in Las Vegas, Nevada for the CCSD school district. This is my 3rd year teaching first grade. I have 3 kids, 2 of which are now doing online learning as well.
Wonderful, and I believe that Samina has dialed in. Can you hear us, Samina?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. And if you'll introduce yourself before we start with the first question.
I am Samina Hadi-Tabassum, and I identify as South Indian. I have dark hair, brown her, and I am currently a professor at Erikson Institute. And I also teach courses in language development and cognitive development. And I'm currently a mother of 3 children who are undergoing e-learning as we speak.
So you understand both sides of e-learning, and I think having that perspective is so special and so wonderful for this panel in particular. I want to start at the beginning and hear from the academic and the teaching instruction side. So I thought this first question would be great for Samina, Emily, and Cheyan. What are some of the basics that we know about early literacy and teaching young students to read?
I can go first.
Sure.
I often talk about human evolution in my class and how for thousands of years, human beings have been wired for oral language, and that babies are born and over 2 to 3 years, they can figure out the code for language and begin to produce language. However, reading is a fairly recent phenomenon. It is something that human beings have invented, and so therefore it's a much more challenging aspect of communication that needs to be formally taught. In addition, we know that English is a very challenging language because of the fact that there is no correspondence or one-to-one correspondence between letters and sounds. So we would say that English is an opaque language. If you look at a word like freight, for example, it has 7 letters and 4 sounds. It is not like many other languages that have a one-to-one correspondence like Spanish and Italian, where every single letter makes a sound. And so as a second language itself, I found it really challenging to look at a word and wonder, is this letter making a sound? Is it not making a sound? What should I do here? So I think it's important to teach the phonological system of the English language, the fact that there's 44 distinct phonemes, and they all are represented by a symbol. In addition to phonological awareness, there's also the emphasis on comprehension and encouraging children to understand what it is that they're decoding.
So to jump on what Samina was saying, because English is so complicated, repetition is so important for my first graders. They need to repeat a letter and a sound hundreds of times before they can connect the two together. And so with repetition, we also have to create a safe space where kids feel that it's okay to make mistakes, because in English, you're going to make tons of them because it's so complicated. So creating that safe space where it's okay to try and for your teacher to correct errors and to acknowledge when you're getting it right. But that repetition over and over again, repeating those letters and sounds is so important for our youngest readers.
Absolutely. Cheyan, what are you noticing in your classroom?
So I agree with a lot with what Emily said, and Samina. There's a lot of repetition that needs to be done at their age, a lot of feedback too. We need to be able to have them do it over and over again, which is why small group is so important, because we can hit those individual students really fast and really quick. Just building those basic foundational skills like phonics and phonological awareness are really important at this age.
Absolutely, and we are so glad that both of you use the program in your classrooms, and we get to see a lot of those really wonderful results. Our next question comes with a couple of terms, and you see them on the right hand of your screen with synchronous learning, asynchronous learning, pedagogy, and phonemic awareness. But it has to do with the effect of switching to virtual learning and what that's made on early learning, especially literacy. And we also have an audience question that came in with this during the registration, and that is, what is the recommended amount of virtual teaching for early childhood, specifically for 5- and 6-year-old children, so those really young children?
So our CPS guidelines in Chicago, our school day is 6 hours, and the recommended time for synchronous time, so that's on meetings with me, is 180 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. And then the other 180 minutes is their asynchronous time. So that's time that they're reading independently. They might be doing paper and pencil activities, or they might be using other learning websites that are a little bit more tailored to the skills that they're practicing.
Great. And Samina, I know you had a lot of, we were rehearsing this, and I especially loved hearing you talk about bringing in just some great teaching practices around that. Do you mind sharing that with people?
Sure, I definitely think that we're doing this for the first time. It's a grand experiment. We have to see how the end results are going to turn out. What I do see is that children, I think right now, are just learning to use the technology as opposed to using the technology to learn. At what point we'll get to that, we don't know in the academic year. But I think it's important to keep in mind the same concerns that you have in an in-classroom, in the sense of how much attention can they provide, how much focus can they provide, are there distractions that are going to keep them away from the learning at that point? But it's really important to keep in mind that the same holds for virtual, in the sense of, you know, if you have a 5-year-old who really don't want to do anything more than 10 to 15 minutes, and thinking about how can you get the child to use different types of tools to help control themselves, to regulate themselves, right, during the entire teaching period as well. But once again, I think that the physicality of the classroom is missing. They're missing their friends. They're missing the ability to get up and grab a book and lay on the floor. And how do we then encourage those same types of rituals in classroom with e-learning as well?
Absolutely. And I'm not sure if it was this question or later, but earlier in the week, you mentioned even with your own children, setting up a really clear distinction between what is fun tablet time and what is fun, or what is learning time. Do you mind talking about that just a little bit? Because
Sure.
It made me think, even as a parent, along those lines in the days
Sure.
since.
I have a set of 10-year-old twins, and when e-learning came on the platform in March, they loved it because it's just 2 hours of school. And then they spent most of the time Zooming with their friends, connecting with their friends, virtually playing games like, Roblox and all these other Minecraft sorts of games. So I really encourage them to socialize with their friends. I think that's really important. You know, play is play, whether you're doing it online or in the classroom. But now that school is serious and it's from 8 to 3 and they're on screens all day, and then they want to play with their friends online, and it becomes almost like a 12-hour day of being on screens. So we've had some really tough conversations about how perhaps that could come on the weekend instead, and that at 3 o'clock we have them shut their screens and just go outside and play in the backyard, just so that they don't turn into zombies of sort, right? And it affects their eyes and their body, and they just are just fatigued by the time 3 o'clock gets around.
Right. I really found that fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. Matt, our next question is really in your wheelhouse, and I'm excited for you to share some of your insights on here. But can you provide more insights on what type of tech solutions that you're seeing be used from the educator community, and what type of responses have you been getting from the educator community? So sort of along the ideas of what is working and what types of solutions are working better.
Sure. I'm not going to endorse any specific platform or service, but in the surveys we sent out, and in terms of requests for training, the majority of schools that have been getting in touch with us are using Google tools and Chromebooks. Of course, other platforms and devices are also being used. But really, educators are hungry for professional learning opportunities, both online and in person, to understand and learn how to utilize these tools to the best of their abilities in the various situations that schools have developed for teaching and learning. No two districts seem to be doing things exactly alike, so there's a lot of variability out there. Teachers are doing a great job doing their best to support students as we're all learning to navigate this new and ever-changing landscape together. We are seeing lots of requests for training in things like formative assessment, how to conduct discussions online, using tools like Google Forms to gather not just summative feedback, but how students are feeling while they're out of the classroom, things like that.
Makes a lot of sense. And I know it's been such a swift change for educators that we particularly tried to keep tried to make their lives much easier by putting anything that they would need into whatever learning management system that would best be used. But I know lots of organizations are looking at that type of response. So it is interesting to hear what you're hearing. Emily and Cheyanne, along those lines of the classroom, what would you say are the biggest challenges in teaching younger students right now to read in this remote environment?
I can start. So to go back to that repetition, that is a real challenge. And the way reading in motion work is there's a lot of I say, you say, I call out, you call out. And as we all know on a Zoom call, everybody has different response times. And so you can't really do that because you say H and then you hear ha 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 ha, ha for echoes and echoes. So that's really hard. So you can't, at school, I'm listening to everybody. I can hear everybody's voice and I can hear who's saying the sound and who's maybe saying the wrong sound. And I can't do that on the screen. I can really only listen to one person at a time. So that's been a big challenge. And with that comes assessing them. I'm constantly keeping a running track in my brain and often on paper about who knows which sounds, who doesn't know which sounds. And I can see their lips moving at home, but I can't really tell what they're saying. So that's one big issue. And the other is to jump on what Samina was saying earlier, is to just give them that time that is not just staring at a screen. And oftentimes the kids are on for a half hour or an hour at a time. And in my classroom, we would never do something for a half hour at a time. I would teach them for 5 minutes. They'd go practice. I'd go check on everybody. They'd have things to do when they're finished. And then we'd come back and we would kind of summarize. And that we're finding ways to do that online, but it just can be a bigger challenge because when I send them off to go do writing, they might not have their paper for that day, or they might not have their folder, it's left in their bedroom or something. So it's a little bit harder to kind of get them to be able to practice independently when they're with me, so that I can see what they're able to do. Those have been like my two biggest challenges, I would say.
I believe it, Cheyanne, and I love that we have two teachers here from two very different parts of the country, both in larger districts. Cheyanne, what are the things that you're seeing in your classroom as well?
So those have all been really big challenges for me. But another thing that I wanted to add is just the kids having the text in their hands. Like with the phonics skills, we would have text that they could track with. So it's really hard for them to track. I get lost on the computer when I'm reading on the computer. So these little kids who are just learning how to read, it's really hard for them to follow along as well. It's also been really hard to get them leveled text that's at their level. And we have like a whole bunch of resources, like we use Mayon a lot, but they're still learning how to navigate the computer. And so that's been just a really big challenge because it's really hard getting them to go to the place that we want them to go after to do their independent work. So that's been a really big struggle.
I believe it, because at this age especially, it's so important to separate the tech learning versus the academic learning. And we want to really make sure if we're understanding where kids are, that we're going for their academic learning. So I believe it. Emily?
Yeah, just to jump up on those tough tech issues, everyone's saying that this is everyone's first year teaching again. The things that I know work the first couple weeks of school, even if I'm trying to do the same skill, I tried to send the kids this slideshow today to make a copy so that they could move stuff around. And it was a disaster. They were making the boxes too big. They couldn't move them. They couldn't drag them. And I thought it would be so easy and they would have fun because it was something they could do and not just listen to me say. I just had no gauge if that was going to work or not. And so we're kind of doing all these experiments to see what's going to work and what's not going to work and what's too hard. And, and they just get frustrated at home and they don't have an adult to help them, or even if there is a grown-up, it can all be very frustrating, especially when they don't have the language to tell me what they're seeing. They don't understand the language for me to help them to get to a different window or those kinds of things. So there are all these layers of trying to get things to work for them.
Absolutely. I believe it.
Kristen, can I make a comment on that?
Absolutely. I saw you unmute. Definitely.
You know, what's interesting is that so much of the technology is iPad, and so much of it requires children to use their touch, their fingers to move things around, and they're not really designed for tiny fingers, and it gets challenging. But the reason we don't do voice-based commands is because the software it has a very difficult time recognizing children's voices. Oftentimes children are mumbling and it's not really clear where one word starts and the other doesn't. So you and I might use GPS and it recognizes an adult voice, but much of the technology today is still touchscreen and hand and kinesthetic based because the software just can't recognize a child's voice, and it's challenging once again. And so how do we create better technology that children can actually respond orally into that tablet rather than having to use their fingers to configure solutions?
That's a really great observation. It leads so well into this next question, this next idea of where are we going in the terms of literacy, early literacy instruction, especially in the realm of technology. But where do you see us going next in the next 5 to 10 years? And Samina, if you don't mind, go ahead and start with that.
Sure. I mean, I think we were lucky in the sense that many schools had already brought technology into the on-site classroom, and much of it is due to differentiation. We know that when you're teaching reading, that there's a wide range of abilities and knowledge and skills within that classroom. So many schools were already using iPads and other type of reading-based software to get children to get some of that individual instruction. So I think the idea of using technology for differentiation was always there and will always remain, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years. We're now seeing this idea of technology for whole class instruction, which has not really occurred prior to this moment in time in history. In some ways, you have to ask yourself, how much has the instruction really changed? How much has the curriculum really changed? So can I still do whole group reading instruction? Can I still model reading? Can I still have children work in pairs? Can I still do small guided reading groups, even if it happens to be through a Zoom session? So in some ways, the pedagogy and the curriculum has remained the same. The medium has changed along the way. I'm hoping that the technology gets better if we can continue to face these types of social situations that kind of put us online rather than in person. But I definitely think the software and the hardware has to be responsive to the young learner.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a very specific category, the young learner. Matt, what are you seeing, and what do you think will be happening in the next year, and again in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I want to start by saying I am in no way a specialist in literacy with the itty bitties. So I would defer to Samina and our other panelists, of course, when it comes to pedagogy. What we're seeing right now on the tech front, we're already seeing an increased demand for devices. Schools that didn't have devices prior to this pandemic are trying to obtain them as quickly as possible, and simply getting those devices into the hands of students and their teachers is an enormous challenge. In these times of overnight and same-day delivery, we're seeing reports of delivery times for new Chromebooks and iPad, well, Chromebooks at least, being measured in weeks and months rather than a few days. Once kids get the devices, the next hurdle is how do you use them for learning? There is an enormous need for universal broadband access, especially for low-income students and for students who live in rural areas. I hope that the folks listening tonight will reach out to those who can help make these things happen, and try to get increased access to high-speed internet resources as a basic need for education, rather than something that is only available in many places in urban and suburban middle and upper class situations. Last, I think we're going to see teacher professional learning and teacher preparation programs pivoting. We were caught kind of unprepared, And I think we are going to see an increased focus, not just in computer supported learning, but in more formative and summative assessment training, project-based learning, and the critical importance of social emotional learning in our classrooms across every subject and every grade level. I think our professional development programs and our teacher training programs in colleges and universities are going to see a need to make some maybe mid-course corrections as the needs of our students move in this new direction.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, so many of us, I would say all of us, parents, teachers, partners, are worried right now about advancing early literacy and making sure that students are moving forward and not taking a step back. Samina, do you have any advice around how we can advance early literacy in a time when it seems like we might be taking a step back with these, especially with a lot of these technology restrictions that Matt was talking about?
Right. I think one of the things you have to think about is during this e-learning moment, there is great inequity in terms of the type of scaffolding that's being provided. So there are some children who are literally sitting next to a parent or caretaker while they are in e-learning. Then there are some children whose adult caretakers might be in the room, might be washing dishes and doing other chores, and they might give them directives perhaps across the room. And then you've got some families where the child is left in that room pretty much all day while the adult caretaker takes care of other responsibilities. So this issue of scaffolding is really, really important. I think previously, prior to the pandemic, we saw parents and our communities as perhaps partners, but I think now we really need to see them as co-collaborators. I can't imagine the amount of responsibility of trying to get children to read with just the teacher during e-learning. There's got to be better collaboration with parents because they truly are in the room now, hopefully with the child. And so how do we train parents to become some of those early teachers, right? How do we train them on their curriculum? How do we get parents to better understand how they can reinforce some of the skills at home? And so it's a really paradigm shift, right? Before, you know, you were with the child for 8 hours a day. Now the parents are with the child for 8 hours a day. And so how do we build those collaborations now and sustain them even when we are out of this pandemic?
And I think that's exciting moving forward. In March, all of us were in the whole country were very reactive, but now I'm glad that we have this incubation period to see how we can explore parents being partners in their child's learning and collaborators. And I love that, just that mind shift of going from supporters to collaborators and bringing in more of the family. What is one of the number one ways we as educators and support providers can make a substantial difference in supporting our young readers right now? Emily, do you mind starting with that question?
Yes, because I believe Samina's point is exactly the way to make a difference right now. Parent communication and parent support is, for me, really the number one thing, because she's right. I'm spending so many fewer minutes with the kids and they're doing so many more things by themselves that normally I would be there to coach them through, to help them, to swap out this book for this book when it's too hard. And, you know, there are grownups at home doing that, and a lot of kids are doing that on their own. So parent support and building a relationship, just like with the kids, where parents feel comfortable asking me when they don't know what's going on, or when they're confused, or when they're having a hard time, to feel like that they are not going to be judged or anything, that they can just ask me like, hey, I don't know what this is. To have that community for all of the members of my class, the kids and the parents. So just building that support. And I've been trying to make a lot of videos, how-to videos, how to get to the assignments and turn stuff in and all of that, just so they have kind of some guidelines of where to go. And then building up parents' confidence as well. I'm always telling the kids to kiss their brains when they do something well. And I'm doing the same thing for the parents, giving them thumbs up and sending them messages about, oh, you're great job, all their assignments are turned in. And, I feel like I'm doing that more now than for the kids than I am the parents, because they're the ones I'm really in touch with. And just building up everybody's confidence that, you know, they can do this at home and I'm here for them. And just that, you know, we can do this together, but we do have to be on the same team.
Absolutely. Cheyan, what are your thoughts around how educators and support providers can make a substantial difference in supporting readers right now?
So on top of that, I just think that small group is a really important time for educators at this moment. Well, really in the classroom as well. Just making sure that we have an explicit lesson during that time and that we're using all the time that we can during that time, because we can differentiate our students' needs during small group time. RIM has done a really good job at providing us lessons for our small group, which is really great to use. During small group, we can also encourage parents that this is a really good time to sit with your kid and watch our lessons, because they will be able to see how their child responds to our teaching very well. They get more time responding to us, and I just think this is a really good time for parents to see how their kids learn and kind of where their skills are really at. So small group time.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to hear you that those lessons have been helpful. I know our virtual team was very intentional about making that easier for teachers to plug in and just use without having to create all the slides yourself. And
it has.
And then, you know, that portion so the parents can practice as well. Samina, I would love to hear your thoughts on this question as well.
I agree. I think, once again, it's really about reinforcement of these various types of skills and abilities along the way. But it's also about being creative, right? How can we provide better solutions that encourage perhaps our children to think of reading as not something that's just done through a screen, but in other ways also. So I know that our children's teacher is reading books on a YouTube channel. And so they're not necessarily all on Zoom, you know, listening to him read. You know, they can access that video of him reading at another time and have time to listen to it carefully on their own individually, rather than, you know, 30 kids trying to listen to a teacher read a story aloud. So I think it's also allowed teachers to say, okay, how can I compartmentalize the day? Instead of, you know, when you're reading a book aloud, sometimes you're dealing with student behaviors. So I think in some ways it's allowed you to kind of play with your schedule a little bit more. You know, when do I really need to do one-on-one instruction? When do we need to do small group instruction? When do we need to do whole group instruction? So I think teachers are being very creative about how to take advantage of that 8 to 3 schedule and give a little more flexibility for children to be a little bit more independent in their own reading acquisition.
Absolutely. And the Monday you were talking about the book walks, that your school has this really great, you know, that they're using the actual physical space. And I've seen it around other areas too, but
Sure.
that painted such a great visual mental picture. If you'll talk about that again.
So we're a few blocks from our school building. It's empty. There's nobody in there, right? Besides the administrators. But yet, at 3 o'clock, we take our kids to that park, and you know, we let them play out in the school grounds. And I recently saw on Facebook a school that decided to take a very popular children's book and print it out in very large size and laminated it and put it on wooden boards. And then they have these pages kind of laid out in chronological order across the lawn. And finding that now families are coming to the schoolyard, they're reading these books, and they're having a very communal, you know, literacy event, and they're socializing around literacy. So how can you still take advantage of that school building for families to be much more interactive? I know that one of the things that our teacher does is that he sends postcards to our children once every 2 weeks, and so they get this postcard in the mail, and they see you on Zoom, but getting this very, you know, personable postcard from their teacher just makes it much more human. So how do we humanize this experience? How do we bring that human element to the day-to-day life of e-learning?
Absolutely. And just the physical, you know, the postcard's a different type of physical space, but that connection that physical connection. And then just, I love the idea of the book walk building community around the school, which is really a heart of so many of our communities, and a way to bring families in, and so many other things around literacy. So there are, I think, some misconceptions that people do have around virtual learning, and we know that all screens are not bad. How can we combat these misconceptions and communicate those very best practices that we're seeing, and how can we communicate them more effectively? Samina and Matt, I'm going to have you answer that question. So Samina, do you want to go first?
Sure. I always joke with my own children that I spent a lot of time watching TV and I turned out okay. So we had screens growing up. I was a part of that latchkey, a generation where my parents worked all the time and we, were at home taking care of ourselves. And so the argument is that, I sat around watching lots of TV, but I was there with my siblings and we talked about the things we were watching. And so the argument is we still need that human communication. We still want to talk to each other about what it is that we're consuming. And so, yes, your child might be in e-learning from 8 to 3, but then to stop and say, what did you learn today? What are two things that you enjoyed about the day? What are two things that you just did not like about the day? But to still have that human conversation at the end of that e-learning day, and building communication with your child is essential. And yes, they're with screens, but screens also are just yet another tool for us to have conversations about. And I think I said this earlier about how Aristotle had complained and moaned that we had books because now no one was going to sit around the fire and share oral stories together and memorize oral stories. So I think this is a new paradigm shift where maybe perhaps moving in a different direction, but it doesn't mean that we don't need that love and passion to communicate and talk to each other about what our day was like.
Absolutely. Matt, what are your thoughts on this question?
Oh, I have so many thoughts, but I'm going to limit mine to two. First of all, Samina is spot on, and I can't support the things that she said enough. The two that kind of get to me most, number one, soon we'll all get back to normal. Short-term or long-term, the face of education has changed and will continue to change. And I think we need to accept that now we are all living in our new normal. And we should be prepared, and we should be preparing our students for a future that is going to be very different than we probably planned. The second one, and I throw this out there for our administrators, for our parents, for our legislators out there. One does not simply put a class online. Or live stream your classroom activities to students everywhere. It's a whole lot more than that. To be really effective, either in a blended or a remote learning scenario, it kind of takes a different approach to planning and developing really engaging really engaging learning activities that could be delivered either online or in person. And I think as we have all learned, it's really not as easy as it sounds. In terms of communication, I agree with everything that's being said. I hope we're thinking multimodal. You can send home newsletters, whether those are paper or electronic, post things on social media, create a video or an audio podcast feed or something like that. We all have these fancy gadgets in our pockets. You know what? They make great phone calls. And if we're talking early literacy, I love that idea. Send a postcard home and have parents and students read together. That is the best way to engage parents, to communicate, and it's okay to get kids away from these screens when we can.
Absolutely. I have a teenager, so it's not nearly the same as having a young child, but I feel like I know more about what's happening in class than I normally would have. And I think I'm going to miss it when he goes back to in-person school. But we have this very special incubation time right now in testing out the best technology tools to go forth with learning from here on out, and how do we put those in our toolbox as teachers. Emily and Cheyanne, so we've heard about the challenges and we've talked a lot about screen time, but is there something, and I know there is because I've seen both your classrooms and your data and all of those great things, but is there something that you've done well in implementing virtual learning for your students, and something that you wish everybody was doing, and why?
So like Emily mentioned earlier, making it so that kids feel very safe making mistakes in the classroom. And Samina also said humanizing virtual learning. One thing that I've made sure to do every single day is have 15 minutes of morning meeting where the kids come in, we can talk to each other, we all say good morning to each other. This is really easy to do in the classroom because they can just turn and talk to their partners. But when they come in, they're still feeling a little uncomfortable because they're still getting used to seeing their face on the camera and their friend's face on the camera. And so just getting them to know each other and feel like they have a place where they're still loved and respected by everybody on camera just makes it easier to get them to participate in the lessons. They're not so worried about making the mistakes or so worried about sounding silly when they're singing or sounding silly when they're dancing to the songs. And so that's just one thing that I've felt like it was really important so that we can build the classroom community like we would have in the actual classroom.
That's great. I love the idea of the morning meeting to build that sense of trust and space, especially in the online space.
Thanks.
Emily, what are some of the best practices you're seeing or doing?
To Cheyanne's point and Samina's point about how TV can sometimes be really great. Everywhere on the internet is reminding us that Mr. Rogers was the original virtual teacher, and he did such an amazing job building all of those things, community through the TV, giving kids a space where they can experience big feelings and learn how to deal with them, where they can learn and see how the world works. I still show Mr. Rogers videos about going to those factories. They're cool still. So just that has been the thing that is driving me every day, trying to be just my best Mr. Rogers, and remembering that I can still have an effect on kids through the screen, and I can expose them to things that can make them think and make them feel, and that we can still do that when we're not in the same space together. But also opening that space whenever we have a break. I always say to the kids, if you have something to share, you can stay on before you hang up. And, there's always 15 kids who are waiting to share, and just giving them that time that they can just tell you whatever they want to tell you. And that's really important to them. And it's really important to me so that I, can get to know them a little bit better in this virtual world.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful. And again, you're both just two wonderful rock star teachers, and we're very happy to have you here and sharing some of your best practices. So thank you. So as a concluding question for this part of the panel, I'd love to get everybody's response to this. So an audience member expressed concern about how to balance the learning time students need in the early grade levels and what is developmentally appropriate for screen time, which does feel kind of at odds. So what is one piece of practical advice you would give to parents working to support their young learners at home? So I would say, let's go from Samina, Emily, Cheyanne, and Matt.
This is really tough. It's tough for all of us. One thing we know about young children is they love routines. It makes them feel safe, and they're walking into a very unknown world, right? So what I would suggest to parents is they will be okay. Human evolution kicks in and they will be fine. But it is about routines. How, even with e-learning, how can you set up routines, whether it's going for a walk during lunchtime or having a special breakfast together, but having those routines in place, I think, is really essential. And when the technology fails, to say it's okay, we're going to get through this. We will all be fine by the end of the day.
I love that.
I guess I would say my biggest tip that I am telling to parents and students all the time is that when you have reached a breaking point or you're frustrated, to take some deep breaths, walk away, and try again tomorrow. And I've been trying really hard to model that for them too. Like earlier today when I sent them that thing that was way too hard, I saw these little tears on the other side of the screen. I felt so terrible. And while it was frustrating, it was also the perfect opportunity for all just to say, you know what, this didn't work. We're going to stop. We're going to take some breaths. We stood up and we did some butterfly breaths and we put on some stories to listen to, and we'll try something different tomorrow. And to go with the importance of parent communication, afterwards, I sent an email during lunchtime to parents. I didn't want them to be concerned about why their children were so upset. So I sent an email and said, this is what's going on. This is what we did. It was too hard. I'm so sorry. And then I sent a message to the kids too and said, if you have time, please read this message to the kids, and just saying, you guys did a great job. It was really hard. When we learn something new, it's often going to be frustrating. So it's okay. We'll try again tomorrow. And just keeping that communication going so everybody knows what's going on, and just feeling like it's okay. Some things are gonna go well and some things aren't, and we'll just keep trying to find new solutions together.
I almost want a copy of your email to put it up. To put it beside my own computer. It's so true though. It's very true. Tomorrow's another day.
When you're in it, it's hard to remember, but
it is because we put pressure on ourselves, and kids put pressure on themselves as too, and we have to remember that they want to please. Yeah,
they just want to do the thing you ask them to do, and
absolutely. Cheyenne.
So one of the biggest pointers that I could give to parents is just be aware of when your kid needs a break. I know I have two at home. One's a second grader, one's a kindergartner, and my kindergartner cannot sit still. He's very active. He needs to be moving. So just being able to see when he needs a break and teaching him when he needs to give himself a break too is one thing that's been really important with this distance learning. Whereas in the classroom, they'd be moving around a whole lot and doing different things. It's really hard for them to keep their attention on the screen while they're learning, and they don't get a whole bunch of like interactive time with the teacher that they would in the classroom. So just be really aware of when your kid needs a break and letting them take that break.
Absolutely. And Matt?
Sure. I guess my advice to parents is, and especially if you're concerned about screen time, take a couple of days and start tracking your child's screen time and decide, is it in school category? Are they just playing? Are they killing time? Are they communicating with others? We've all seen the children in shopping carts at the store, at the table at the restaurant, who's staring at their caregiver's cell phone. And that's okay. I've done it too. We've all done it. But how much screen time are they already getting at home versus how much screen time are they getting as part of school activities? Then have that conversation, whether it's in person or virtual or whatever. Have that conversation with educators, with schools, and talk about what is appropriate for school-age children, and see if there are ways you can work together to maybe cut back on the screen time a little bit at home versus, how can we pare that back as educators so that kids can get out into a more text-rich environment with their caregiver, whether that's on the sofa curled up or walking the neighborhood and looking for text alongside their caregiver. Those are, I guess, some great ways to both work in literacy as well as monitor that screen time.
Right, literacy with the movement and and again, building those oral language skills as well. Before we move into so we have 2 questions that have come in from the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and then we have a couple that were sent in from attendees when they registered. So panelists, thank you so much for all of the sage words that you've had for us the last 45, 50 minutes. Our first question from the Q&A, the live Q&A though, is what do you think the long-term effects of last school year's ending and this year's experimenting will be on our young readers? And then should we hold them all back a year? Emily?
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of parents had, and thinking about this and last semester being online and going into this school year, I had a lot of anxieties about about all kinds of things, but one anxiety I never had was, are the kids going to be too far behind? Because that's just what teachers do. Teachers meet kids where they are and take them to the next level. So I was never concerned about, oh my gosh, they are going to be, at kindergarten level. I always have kids who come in at what would be a typical kindergarten level or preschool level. And I have kids who come who can read like a 3rd or a 4th grader too. So that has never been my concern. It's just how can we meet the kids where they are and where can we take them next? That's what our whole job is.
Absolutely. And I think that idea is you teach who walks in the room, not where they were last year, not where they're going to be at the end of this year, but who walks in the room, and scaffold their learning plan from there. Anybody else want to reflect on that?
I do agree that the research shows that if a child has 2 consecutive years of poor instruction, then they do fall behind almost to grade level, right? So we're hoping that we're going to get out of this and hopefully be back into the classroom next year. But if it happens to be over 2 years, then I think it is something we need to look at much more seriously. I do know from research that we've looked at the summer slide situation, right? Those 3 months when children are not in school and they come back and you see a dip in their academics. So I think we are going to see a dip this year. And the argument is when we come back, how do we just keep, going back to increase that achievement? It might be coming back with some real full force instruction to see what's missing. So I think we have to be prepared for, this year we're going to move forward day by day, but then when they come back, what are some ways that we can really boost the instruction based on what was gone or missing? I also think we have to go back to looking at parents as collaborators in this whole process and thinking about, schools that avoided the summer slide are the ones that really had some of those additional exercises they did during the summer, whether it's reading books with their library, whether it's doing some type of a workbook, whatever we can. So thinking about what does the research say about the summer slide, thinking about what schools have done to avoid the summer slide, and see if some of those same strategies could be used during this year as well.
Absolutely. So the next question that we had is, which I think kind of builds well on what you've just said about having our parents be involved, is do you have parents that become too involved? Are they hovering over their children? Are they criticizing their children? Is that something that we're seeing right now as well? Cheyan, you look like you have an answer ready.
Yes, I've seen it with quite a few parents, whether it's when they're doing the testing and state testing, like we do maps here. It gets so stressful because it adapts with the kid. It gets high, 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 high. And we've had a lot of parents just like, they can't see it. And so then they help their kid do it. But then we also have parents that just their kid can't be wrong. So they hover over them while we're doing lessons. And you can tell when the kid's getting reprimanded because they get the question wrong, or the parents are like, they can't even write, like, am I supposed to write it for them? And one time I had to just do a whole lesson on phonetic spelling. I was like, they need to get it wrong. They need to try, because in the classroom, we would be there to scaffold them, but we are not giving them the answers right. Like, we're not writing out everything for them. We are encouraging them to spell. We're encouraging them to try out the math problem and get it wrong before we teach them the right, or give them the right answer. So I've seen it a lot in my classroom.
I believe it.
I can say that in my school district, we had originally started off with this idea of having Monday and Tuesday for e-learning, and then Wednesday being off, and then Thursday and Friday. And the argument was that Wednesday would allow for incubation, for independent time. And unfortunately, parents protested that original plan and really wanted school, right? They wanted more accountability, more academics, with this fear that somehow their children are going to not catch up. And I think that's a false argument. We know throughout human history that there have been plenty of times and moments that children were not in school so extensively, right? And we also know that being in school 8 hours a day is not the solution either. So I challenge many parents to think about human history. And I also think the kind of parenting we're seeing today has never been seen in human history, and that it just cannot be sustained. I'm thinking back to our grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, where children were not at the center of their lives. And so now we see a whole generation of parenting that doesn't look like any kind of parenting we've seen before in human history. And it just cannot be sustained. It's just too taxing. And so I think we need to really have a conversation amongst ourselves as to how did we get to this point, and really look at where parenting is going.
Mm-hmm. I would love to read more about that, and am interested in hearing where we are going along those lines from here, especially in this time in the world when there are so many career demands as well as parenting demands at the same time, and educating demands. So our next question that came in is around assessments, and I know it's something we've talked about quite a bit, mainly because, well, not mainly, but because we like to set goals around student data that comes in and help teachers set goals. And I think it's a great way to build autonomy in children as well. But in the course of a regular year, we know we would have assessments at least 5 times a year for a child to help guide our instruction, those formative and then some summative. What are the plans that you're hearing this year from your schools or your networks or your district around assessments this year? And what are some of the things that you're seeing?
So we have heard from CPS that every fall they send out an assessment calendar, like Cheyan was saying about when we do NWEA or different kinds of things. And so that calendar has been sent out. It's not clear how that's going to be done at home, but I rely on DIBELS and TRC testing all the time, assessing. That goes along with the reading and motion skills to know where the kids are at, how much they've grown, and those are very valuable to me to be able to track their progress every couple weeks or so. I do plan on using those assessments this year. It's just going to be at a different time than it normally would. Normally, I'd be trying to get all these done as soon as possible, so it's in groups so they can be doing things that are just right for them, and it's just not possible. We just don't have the skills to be able to do that kind of stuff yet. So just like everything, we're just being flexible, and we'll get to it when we can get to it. And for now, we're just kind of trying to navigate our new world, and eventually I hope to be able to use those kinds of things to tailor virtual learning a little bit more to them, but I'm just not ready quite yet.
Right, that makes sense.
I'm actually on the Illinois State Board of Education's Committee for Bilingual and ESL Children, and they take the access test around January of every year that measures their listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and that's administered by the teacher, and data is uploaded and sent out to WIDO, which assesses this data. So we have data from 2020, right before the pandemic, but how do we ensure that this can happen at home and have that same degree of reliability, right? It is an instrument that's being used to measure student growth as well as the growth of schools. And if it just cannot be reliable to have that same assessment administered within the child's home. There's also huge issues of inequity, right? So many of our ELL children are oftentimes in our lowest socioeconomic bracket, and do they have the devices to even conduct this at home? And once again, why are we collecting this data? What purpose does it serve? We might have to say we're going to skip a year and come back to it in a year's time.
Okay, that's Very, very interesting. I think we're all following the assessment discussion very closely in a way that a child is not penalized for their access to technology or their support at home. The next, and we actually, I'm excited to hear you say that about ELL and ESL, because one of our questions coming up is around communicating with parents who don't, actually we'll go ahead and go to that one. How are we communicating with parents that do not speak English to make sure that children are having a more equitable supports with their parents? What are some of the strategies that you have seen?
At my school, I am very fortunate to have an aide with me a few hours a day who is a native Spanish speaker, and my parents who do not speak English are all Spanish speakers. And he's been wonderful. He's called people on the phone and walks them through things. He's gone to people's houses and worked with grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and parents and gotten kids up and running online. Our bilingual coordinator, I make a slideshow every day with all of the blocks of our time and the links for where kids are going and what they're doing. I translate that and send it out every day. But I know that's not a reality in a lot of places, and I'm very lucky to have those supports and to have this relationship with this aide who's so helpful and is able to kind of fill in the gaps where I'm not able to. But I know that's not the case everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we're only limited to parents who speak Spanish, parents who speak a different language. We don't have as many resources to connect with those parents.
Right. What are some strategies, Dr. Samina, that you've seen? Because I know this is and I've heard you say that you're first generation American to this country, so came from parents, and I don't know, your family situation if your parents had strong English skills, but I knew even from my own personal experience that again, in order to support students, we have to have some sound strategies around communicating with parents.
Right. I'm hoping that a lot of the devices that the children have some type of an app that allows for translation, some type of a dictionary. It can be done easily, right? If I know that I have a, Hindi speaking population in my district, can that district technology coordinator get some type of a language translation device, an app onto that child's device? So I'm hoping people are having those kinds of conversation. In the end, the devices can only do so much. But I do know, for example, I've used the Oxford Picture English Dictionary for many of my students, and that is an excellent software that can also be utilized to provide some of the kind of basic words that children might not know. And for early learners in particular, it's a very different beast when you're looking at secondary children and the sophisticated nature of what they're reading. I can tell you, growing up, it was challenging. It took me 5 to 7 years to master the English language. We relied on siblings, so I'm sure many of the ELL children in our schools are relying on sibling support, right, as the primary way that they're kind of coming to understand what their assignments are, what's being asked of them. And so utilizing sibling support, utilizing exactly what Emily said, looking at the kind of human capital within a community, trying to get a group of people perhaps on a block or within the borders of the school to say, can we provide what we call these pods? So you see these kinds of pods appearing in many wealthy communities where families are kind of bonding together to help support each other, right? And their children's learning. Perhaps we can have that same vision for ELL children, to have some pods where they can rely and support from other members of the community who can give them that linguistic support as well.
Absolutely. I love the idea of linguistic pods in the community and the support. And again, just the ability to build those oral language skills, whether they're in English or in a second language for students. So I think we have 2 more questions here, but the first one is, what solutions do you have, if any, for low attendance? And I know that's one of the metrics we're really holding ourselves to this year, is that, we're measuring engagement. Are students engaging with content? Is it making them participate and come in to the classes more? So what can we do to get the adults to take more initiative and care more deeply about the school schedule? This question asker says, I agree that we have to be co-partners, but what concrete things can teachers do to make this happen? Are incentives geared toward the parents reasonable?
Well, I can tell you Chicago Public Schools is really struggling with this. I think they said only 30% of 8th graders in that spring semester were actually in attendance, right? And the challenges of especially adolescents tuning out to what's being required of them. There's been great effort on CPS to knock on doors, to get families engaged, to get those devices in the hands. So I want to congratulate them on doing this immense task of trying to get the students onto base one. I can tell you, like, this is kind of a funny situation, but one of my daughter's classmates decided to take a picture of themselves behind a screen, and they just put it up all the time. And the teacher never figured out that they were actually never present, right? So kids are being pretty clever with the technology as well. But I know they're starting to monitor whether children have their cameras on, whether they're participating. Parents are getting emails saying, hey, your kid was here today, but the camera was off. So, but it gets into these questions about children who have attention deficit concerns, and do you really need to have your camera on to be alert and attentive? And so, for example, when I teach my classes, I tell students to have your camera on, but it doesn't have to be on your face. You could be lying on the floor, just have the camera on, and as long as you're listening and paying attention. So I think we need to have conversations about accountability. What do we expect of children, right? And how do we know that they are attentive without really having their eyes on that screen the entire time?
Absolutely. And I loved hearing you talk about studies that were coming out around, from this measuring students' gazes on Zoom and, looking at engagement and are they actively learning and those types of things.
So I think one of the benefits of teaching younger kids virtually is that it's the same as in school. They love school. They still love coming to school. So I fortunately really haven't had attendance problems. I've had perfect attendance and my kids are always there with their videos on. And I think that's very different from kids who are in middle school and high school and even upper elementary, where it is this kind of different attitude in thinking about school. And so while virtual learning for the young kids has a whole different set of challenges, one of the challenges I don't feel that I have is that that they don't want to be there. They do want to be there. And they are like parakeets. They love looking at themselves. So they just they keep their camera on and they just watch themselves all day. So that is a thing that is not typically a problem for us. But attendance is a problem. And like what Samina was saying, it really does go back to building those relationships with families and, showing up at their houses, giving them the things that they need, the support and the tools that they need, and really just trying to build community so they feel compelled to come to school.
Absolutely. And I think educators are so much about breaking down barriers to learning, whether it's a developmental barrier or a physical barrier in the space. So I like the approach that you're talking about, that this is that type of approach. What is the barrier from having a child attend, even if it's an online school, and how can we approach that barrier in a really strategic manner?
Yeah, for so many of our problems, we always talk about root cause. What is the root cause for what this problem is? And it's, it's the same thing when a parent isn't coming, having their child log on. What is the root cause of this? Is it a work schedule? Is it being intimidated? Is it a language thing? And it's, it's never just, I don't want my kid to go to school. There is a cause. And so it is finding that cause and building a relationship to kind of try to help that family, whatever the root cause is, to kind of help build the barrier in between those two things.
Absolutely. Are you finding that because one of our questions was about physical content, that to sort of address that root cause of what is keeping a kid from learning or attending or coming onto Zoom, that you're sending home a lot of physical materials?
Well, I had a little welcome wagon. I called it Miss Quinlan's welcome wagon. And the first week of school, I was able to meet the kids on the playground, and I have a very dear friend who donates tons of school supplies to me every year. So I filled up my little wagon with all the things and journals and notebooks and markers and whiteboards and books and all that stuff. And so I was able to meet kids on the playground, and I've gone to kids' houses to meet them on their sidewalks. I've met everybody but one this year. But lots of teachers at our school are doing the same thing. They're putting together packets, and the kids are able to go pick them up at school. They will have physical math books. But, you know, that's a challenge too, when some parents are not able to come to the school during the hours that the school is open. So there are all these factors involved, but
Absolutely.
you know.
Cheyan, what are you seeing out in Clark County? Are there physical materials being sent home to schools?
So yeah, at the beginning of the school year, we were asked to put together backpacks for our kids. So we were able to put grade level material in that they needed. But as far as deploying, a lot of my kids did pick them up. There are a few in other classes that didn't. But as they need to be replenished, we're not allowed to go to their houses or anything or meet them on campus. It always has to be through the office or the principal. So that's been kind of tough because there's like I know everybody does some things different in every class. So it's been really hard that way.
I'm sure. And then our last question of the night is, what extra measures are we taking, or are you taking with kids that you feel like are currently falling behind? Are you able to schedule extra small group time? Are you able to send more materials home or provide extra practice time for those students?
That does feel hard right now. All of our meetings are between 8 and 12 right now, and the kids go to specials in the afternoon. So I have this hour at the end of the day that is set a time aside for small groups, but they just do not have the stamina right now to do that. But a lot of that is similar to how the normal school year would go. They've been off for the summer, and they just don't have the stamina to be able to be doing learning activities all day. At that time of the day, we'd probably go outside, or we would color or do something a little bit more relaxed. So I think as the year goes and we build up more stamina, we'll have more time for that. But just kind of like a regular school year goes, they're not ready to do all of those things yet.
Right, of the drill down that you would normally do in the physical classroom. An extra practice. That was luckily a very quick answer. We've got one more, our very, very last question of the night, and I think it might be for you, Emily. It's around Google Classroom tools, and I think that, Cheyan, you guys use a different tool in Clark County. You're using Canvas, is what my understanding, but what Google Classroom tools are you finding most useful for your young learners right now?
So I'm finding the Google Slides to be most useful currently. I am able to, just like how you would have a schedule on the board of like a visual schedule. First we're doing phonics, then we're doing math. I'm able to do that same thing in a slideshow, and I can send it to the parents the night before, tells them what materials they need for the day, and then parents and caretakers can just kind of click through each half hour of the day and know exactly what their kiddo is supposed to be doing, and there's the link right there to what's going on. So that has been really, really helpful.
Nice. And that sounds like a really great best practice.
I need to have it on all day too. I'm like, what group are we? Oh,
I know. I was just thinking I need to put all my links in one. But no, and I think we found in teacher training this year, was having all the links in one document, then we could pop easily from group to group. But I like that. I would not have thought about putting that in slides for students to have. And I love that you sent it the night before. And Cheyan was nodding, so I imagine you do something similar too and have a similar practice. So that's a really great tool. It's nice to hear, and it's nice to be reminded of some best practices, that we're not always reactionary, especially right now, that we have some really great tools, and now we're translating them into the digital world and making sure that students are still using them. So,
that's what's my sanity, is trying to not reinvent what I'm going to teach them, just how I'm going to teach them, and take what I know is helpful at school and put it online. Otherwise, it's too big of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. And that does conclude our question and answer session. And so now I would like to invite Jill Fragos, who is our board chair, to come and talk to you a little bit more about how to engage with reading in motion and to close out our program. So thank you. Thank you, panelists, for taking the time in your evening to join us and answer these great questions.
Thank you, Kristen. Wow, what an engaging and insightful dialogue. I want to just say, first of all, thank you to our amazing team at Reading in Motion for hosting this event tonight, and a very special thank you to all of our panelists for contributing to what I think was a really robust conversation. As Kristen said, I am Jill Fragos, and I'm the board chair of Reading in Motion. I have had the wonderful privilege of being engaged with this organization for over 20 years. My preferred pronouns are she, her. So as our executive director, Carl Andros, mentioned, we are super excited about our newest program called Reading Together Anywhere. We could not have launched this without our tremendous supporters, and we hope that some of you will become engaged and many of you will remain engaged with our very important mission. We are currently expanding our program to schools, to new schools, and we welcome you to contact our Director of Education, who you just heard facilitated this great panel discussion, Kristen Walter, and her contact information is listed on the screen. We're also seeking to grow our board of directors, so please reach out to our board retention and recruitment committee that's chaired by Bruce Jones. He's with us tonight, and you can learn more about perhaps engaging with our board of directors. Reading in Motion plans to host another virtual event in the spring, and we welcome your ideas and support. Please reach out to Katie Daniel. She's the last contact on that screen. She's our Director of Development with event feedback and ways, any ideas for if you want to think about contributing to Reading in Motion. Finally, we're asking for your emails, address, so we can share the recording of this event and any further updates on Reading in Motion as well. We hope you'll reach out to us, follow us on social media, and help this important conversation to keep going. So at this time, I really want to just say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And I think we should all take Emily's sage advice and try to be our best Mr. Rogers. There were many pearls of wisdom that were shared tonight, but that was a great one that really resonated with me. So that concludes our meeting. And again, thank you all, and hope you have a wonderful evening.